This month's Where Did the Road Go is brought to you by 5 amazing people. Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Bart Ooms, 36 Dingo, and Michael Fritzky. If you want to become a patron, www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight, I have Mr. Christopher Ernst.
Hey, everybody.
And Vincent Treewell.
Good evening.
Now, Vincent, you do very kindly do all the recaps for the show, which I appreciate the hell out of.
Those are awesome.
Oh, my pleasure.
And you also have your own podcast, which is called what?
The Weird Part with Vincent Treewell.
And you published a book since the last time you were on.
I have. Cosmic Collision.
And what's that?
Amazon?
It's on Amazon. It's fiction, right?
It is. It's a novel. It's
Okay.
a novella. It's a short novel.
About?
Time travel, killer soldiers from the future, a prophetic messiah in our time. But there's a number of things going on there.
It sounds like it.
You say this is fiction? Because this sounds...
Ripped from the headlines. Man.
Right.
It does have a humorous side to it.
Cool. All right. I know you sent me a copy.
great.
I just haven't had a chance to read it yet. Cover's cool. It's in my to-read pile. But yeah,
I have one of those myself. Yes.
so people can find that on Amazon if you're interested in
Yes.
checking it out and helping support Vincent here. All right, so we're going to do mostly listener stories, at least the first part of the show, if not the whole show. We'll see how long it takes us. And we're going to start with what someone sent me as a correction. Oops, and I dropped my tablet. To the Dead Owl story. So this was a story that we talked about in the last episode where a bunch of sort of synchronistic stuff happened after they saw a dead owl. And they wanted to correct their story a bit here. Come on, tablet. There we go. It says, "Hi again. I sent in the dead owl story that was read in the most recent Listener's Stories episode. I have a bit of a correction. I mentioned how there were mushrooms outside the window where the gnomes appeared at in my brother's dream. And yes, that's what it looked like to myself and my siblings when we looked out the window. However, several days later, my sister and I decided to actually go inspect the area, and we found that it wasn't a mushroom, but something a little weirder. When we looked down at the object, it was actually a white object in the shape of a bird, not an owl. It was very detailed, but there was a head and it wasn't very detailed. I'm sorry, it wasn't very detailed, but there was a head and beak and a tail, and it made it apparent that it was supposed to be a bird. I stepped on it to see what material it was made out of, and it instantly shattered, like it was made of a very fragile plastic, almost like an eggshell. It looked as though it was filled with detritus, mud, leaves, twigs, but I'm not sure. I have no idea what it was or where it came from. Too fragile to be a toy, but I can easily, imagine a mundane explanation. A few days before, my sister and I went out to inspect the object. We were outside and noticed a group of birds fighting up in the trees. It was a family of what looked to be robins fighting in the big black raven that then flew off with a nestling in its beak. Happens all the time. Completely non-paranormal, but apparently I must have had birds on the brain. So, I mean, I could almost see a bird taking something like that and trying to make a nest out of it and it falling.
Yeah, but she was saying it was bird-shaped?
Yeah. Well, I'm saying, like, it just happened to... The design on it, I think, is bird-shaped.
Right.
Kind of like a little decorative...
Right.
I got it. Yeah. No, that certainly could have been something, that the detritus that it takes and makes. I guess I thought it was some sort of, like, weird husk that was shaped like a bird.
No, it sounds like, because he said it was like plastic, and when he stepped on it, it shattered, and underneath it was all the the twigs and stuff.
All the stuff, yeah, okay.
Where does it say exactly? It looked down at the object. It was actually a white object in the shape of a bird. Okay. I was thinking of like a round object with a bird sort of in it, like design on it.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like a Christmas tree ornament type of looking thing.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So
I can tell
like
that's
some of those ones that symbolize the Holy Spirit sometimes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yep.
And that could be. I mean, at the same time, it's hard to ignore the sort of fey connotations here because they saw the
That's what it seemed like to me. I mean, that's, I guess, in misunderstanding that it was sort of, to me, it sounded like it was some sort of like rudimentary husk and not like a piece of, some tchotchke or something like that. And then I was thinking that sounded very much like a fey gift, this like a mock-up of a bird of some sort.
Exactly.
And then it just turns to crap, you might say.
Exactly. So I mean, there may be a very mundane explanation for it, but also the fact that it coincided with the dream and the gnomes in the dream and that exact location. I mean, there's some synchronistic stuff there at very least.
Oh, yeah. Well, and there usually is a mundane explanation, but that doesn't mean that didn't happen and that it didn't line up.
Or it didn't mean something.
Way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe they designed a little thing and put it under his window. Also possible.
Could be.
They also had another story. They have wrote in about their friend S before, and they said S had to go to an old government building. I don't remember for what, but it was seriously stressing them out. Once they got there, S hurried into the building and into the restroom. Stressing out and wanting privacy, they checked the stalls, which were all unoccupied, and then locked the door to the restroom. They went over to the mirror to freshen up and noticed movement in the corner of their eye. They noticed a pair of feet slowly place themselves onto the floor as if they were being held up on the toilet so they couldn't be seen. They were gray and I believe diseased in some way, if I'm remembering S correctly. They looked like they belonged to an old lady. S didn't react to it at the time. They were too focused on their problems. But when they got home, it hit them how weird it was and how S was 100% sure nobody else was in the restroom. I asked S somewhat jokingly if they had looked up at the top of the stall to see the horrifying visage might have been hungrily peering down upon them, but for some reason they didn't see the humor in it.
Yeah, that's where my brain goes too. It sounds like something that would happen in like a Japanese horror film.
Yes.
A ghost story film, like somebody, you can see it over the shoulder in the shot, you see them in the mirror and then it racks focus and you can see these feet like coming down. Yeah.
That would be just terrifying.
Yeah.
No.
And then a nice old lady walks out of the stall and you're like, right. Oh, okay.
I mean, it could have been something. Yeah. It could have been like, I don't know, a homeless person who did not have shoes and was in the stall and trying not to be seen,
Yes.
It could.
Yeah.
I certainly know that I've been in stall. I don't know if I've ever pulled my feet up, but if I was, let's say, maybe adding some aromatic flavor to the air in a particular public restroom, I might, try to minimize my presence and the noises that I was making. I don't know. If you catch my drift.
Yes. Unfortunately, I do.
Yeah.
So to speak, yes.
So to speak.
All right. Let's see. This was another one. This is actually another follow-up to not a listener story, but one of the shows. So I wanted to get this in here too. That is not it. Where did you move to? There you go. Our supporter, Indrid Cold, sent this in. I think this had something to do with one of the experimental, either the Roswell or the Hills show. I don't remember which one. And he says, the CIA conducted secret experiments with LSD on the inhabitants of a French town of Port Saint-Esprit. I'm probably saying that wrong. It's probably like Esprit or something. In 1951, resulting in a mysterious mass poisoning that led to psychotic episodes and 5 deaths. It was called Operation Poison Bread. One young girl believed she was being attacked by tigers. A boy of 11 years tried to strangle his mother. And a grandmother threw herself against the wall and broke 3 ribs. One man flung himself from the 2nd floor of the hospital window, shouting, "I am a plane." Even more bizarrely, the fall broke both his legs, but he got up and ran for 5 meters before collapsing. Many more of the locals endured hallucinations involving snakes, fire, and monsters. Now, I've heard about this. Have you guys?
Yeah, it does sound vaguely familiar.
Yeah.
And I was particularly shocked that the CIA did it to France, which was like kind of an ally.
Well, I
But they
mean,
did it to Americans, so I guess it's not surprising.
exactly. And I think that was his point. He was just adding another layer here to the fact that this stuff does happen. They do experiment on people.
Yeah.
Whether we're talking the Havana syndrome or we're talking, what was going on with Roswell or potentially the Hills. I'm on the fence with the Hills. Like Ren's info was kind of interesting, but I'm not sure I'm convinced that it was a psyop.
Right. Yes. Ren does believe it's a psyop.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, he could be right. I can't completely dismiss it, but there's not enough there to convince me that that's the case.
Yeah. So I mean, I remember this one particularly because it used to be that they said this was one of the ergot poisonings. I think.
Yes. Yeah.
But it was more recent, and yeah. And I remember that it's one of those things that's slowly been coming out. I mean, I totally believe it. I believe that the CIA would do that. Like, there's no question in my mind that they would.
Well, especially in that era.
Yeah.
I don't know if either of you guys have seen the documentary series Wormwood about that. It's a very famous case where the CIA doctor jumped to his death, or he probably didn't jump to his death. He was probably thrown from a tall building. And it opened up a lot of things that the CIA was doing at that era. And I mean, I'm not saying what they're not doing now. I have no idea. But especially they were really devil may care with what they did.
Yeah.
There was a very much a hubris of like, we're working for the security of the free world, so we're going to do whatever it takes. And I think a lot of people that were sadists probably, took advantage of that.
Oh, certainly.
And you had actual Nazis that were brought in.
Yeah, that's on top. Exactly. Yeah. Paperclip and, we weren't the only country that was getting them. Yeah. They spread out all those Nazi scientists into different superpowers, and here we go.
Well, and they wanted to surrender to Americans because if they surrender to the Russians, it's going to go really bad.
It's going to be a different type of of lab situation you'll have there, right?
Even if they surrendered to the British, well, you've been blitzing us for the last 6 years,
That's a good point. Yeah.
And we took the Japanese as well, the Imperial Japanese torture experimenter people.
Yeah, and that's what Nick Redfern gets into in the Roswell book there.
Yeah,
which I totally do believe. Yes.
Yeah, I mean that to me, Roswell is almost certainly a U.S. government experiment. The exact details of are hard to really narrow down, but I don't think anything paranormal or extraterrestrial happened with Roswell. Like I said, I'm not decided on the Hills case. Like, that one's still interesting. And the same with Rendlesham. I'm still not decided on Rendlesham. What was real and what was just a psyop. I mean, it was clear there was some psyop stuff going on, but it's a weird spot too.
Yes, I guess the thing that with Rendlesham, when I didn't know for the longest time that and Cash Landrum incident happened within like a 24-hour period.
Yeah, and I think Nick Redfern, again, is the guy who pointed that out, and that the objects were actually fairly similarly described.
Yep.
Yeah, and that made me think this is definitely just advanced aircraft testing.
Yeah. All right, so this one was in response to another story as well. Man, let me see if I can find the original, because this is the guy who had a mandala above his head. Let's see if I can find the original story here in the archive. I probably didn't label it mandala, unfortunately. All right. Well, if you go back, I think it was on the previous show we talked about this. And again, I hit the wrong thing. There we are. And Surfin' Dead 82 said, I've had the mandala thing happen a lot. About 15 years, I'm assuming ago, as I went to bed thinking I wanted something to happen that would prove I had a soul. Ever since then, I'll wake up at least once a month seeing what looks like mandalas, galaxies, or fireworks. I close my eyes and look away only to see it in the same place above me until it fades away. One time I even saw what looked and moved like a big spider made of gold and white stars. There was a lot going on when this started. For the first time, I was reading heavily about all paranormal topics and even about magic. I just wanted to know there was more to the world. Many interesting things happened over several months, including or mostly in dreams, and it led up to some nighttime visitations, definitely not a dream. After that, I was pretty creeped out and everything cooled off, except for after I would wake up, I would see mandalas and other images I mentioned in my first comment. Happens at least once a month.
Oh. for what it's worth, that just seems like something that possibly could have, I don't mean in a negative way, but maybe has a neurological cause. Like that almost seems like something that could be coming from inside the brain. I don't know, but it's possible to me that might be a natural effect.
I mean, it's certainly possible. I feel like this has more of a spiritual connotation to it, though.
Well, he asked for this, and then it appeared, and that,
yeah, and
I think so too. I mean, it was the fact. What is it they said that they were trying to figure out if there was more to the world?
Yeah,
and that I don't know. That seems significant to me because I feel like and again. This is from my particular view, which sort of looks at a lot of these things as sort of being part of a similar kind of control ecosystem, whatever that means. I don't know. I'm, taking it from the valet, theory.
Right.
But it's that seems significant, and that I don't know. I wonder if the specificity of the mandalas and what this person is seeing, that even if they didn't articulate there being anything that was personally significant to them, maybe it is, like, even on an unconscious level, the things that are there. But again, I think like the important thing, if you're viewing this as part of some sort of control system, is I think that part of the control system might be trying to get people or humans, at least here on Earth, we are humans, to shift their perspective and mindset where they are simply believing there is more out there,
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of people that don't. And you have to wonder, is it, I don't know, I mean, is there something to be said for sort of the growth of rational materialism? And, does that need to be sort of tempered? If you think about like how, if you believe in a collective unconscious or an Akashic record, and then also think about the sort of, the impetus that in many ways, nature, when it is impacting on itself, trying to cause balance or working best when it's in balance.
Yeah.
Maybe some people need to be pushed in a particular direction. I don't know. I mean, this again is coming completely through the filter of the lens of my perspective. But
right.
It's the first thing that I think about. Yeah.
I remember at one point waking up and there being a shadow on my ceiling that I watched for a while as it moved along the lines in the ceiling tiles. And it was a small shadow, but very distinct, very, very dark. I think I was probably sleeping. It was probably during the day. So the room had light in it, and like the thing just moved. There was no sense of menace or anything else. And eventually I just dozed back off.
Yeah.
But I mean, it at no point did I doubt that what I was looking at was actually there.
Yeah.
Like I would blink, I'd look away, I'd look back, it would still be there. And I'm like, okay, the same with when I saw the moon shake, I knew that wasn't real. Obviously the moon's not shaking and moving through the clouds, but I was in as normal a state of consciousness as you can get when that happened. So yeah, I mean, him seeing galaxies, mandalas, I don't know exactly what it means because I don't know what the experiences I had meant. But if
do you think something was presenting something to you, giving you kind of a show that it wanted you to see?
Well, yeah, probably. Different ways,
doesn't
though.
Clear much up, but
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that anyone else outside with me would have had the same experience. They might have had some different weird experience. I mean, there was also a light in the field that was reacting to me. So, I mean, yeah, it was just a very high strangeness event. In fact, it was the event that the one with the moon shaking is the one I submitted to Jeff Ritzman and Jeremy Vaney's was the Core project.
Okay. No kidding. Yeah.
Before I knew who they were.
Yeah.
Because a friend of mine just said, hey, these people are looking for, weird experiences. And I went, okay, what's the weirdest one that I can fully explain?
Yeah.
Or at least, describe well. So I sent that to them. But the mandalas to me, I mean, you're reaching out looking for something more, and it looks like something responded in some way.
That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah.
So, all right. After that, okay. We're going to go with Salcedo. He's been on before. Salcedo Paranormal has his own podcast as well. And he's talking about the show we did with Taylor, where we were talking about how Taylor can't visualize things.
Right. Yes.
Oh, yes.
Very interesting.
That's right. This wasn't a story. This was just his perception of it. He said, I've just started listening to this episode, but I have to comment now. I am legally blind. I can see basic two-dimensional shapes like circle, square, triangle, but not much more. I cannot pull up the faces of people I know in my mind's eye. They never come out anywhere near the way I feel like they should. I can come up with basic outlines of some things, cats, dogs, cars, trees, but I can't see these things in great detail in my mind. But I also can't see these things in great detail with my eyes either, unless they are extremely close to me, as I am extremely nearsighted. I think more in words and concepts than actual images. Not sure if that's useful in any way, but I figured I'd share. Yeah, and that is interesting.
I think it's very interesting. Yeah.
What's
just the difference? Yes, in people's perception is quite amazing.
Yeah.
I've heard. I'm going to mangle it. Cercito?
Yeah.
I've heard his podcast, and it's fascinating. And he had some experiences which were paranormal.
Yeah.
Apparently entities. And he could see them clearly.
Yes. Yeah, there was one with a head, if I remember right. Like he could see crystal clear, like the head of something.
Really interesting. Yeah.
Well, it's also like when people who have been blind their entire lives have a near-death experience and see everything.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, I mean, that's, it's something that I've heard, many times. Is this idea of, which I've talked about before, of the subtle body, if one believes in that, having, organs just like the physical body does that are able to see things that exist, on different planes. And you have to wonder if there's an evolution of these, as a spiritual evolution in the same way as a material evolution, whether or not it's similar to, how people talk about babies or, young infants learning how to sort of see shapes. They start out where, and this is again all ostensibly, we really don't know what they see, but people believe that they're not necessarily seeing just because of the development of their eyes and corneas, that they can't see things that are farther away, or things are more shapes and stuff like that. It's something I've thought about, because if you think about humans are kind of as a species, at least on this planet, we're very young. And I don't know, have we plateaued, or is there more that might develop? And could some of these anomalous things that are happening be part of our developing senses, as a species?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you got people who can see things like auras and such. And
I think that's like the kernel of truth for me, at least, in the whole starseed thing, or like, I think it was taken in a much more like, I don't know, not realistic, but maybe more realistic way in like concepts like the X-Men, or mutants from Marvel.
That's something you said, Chris, a while back, that if there might be a force driving evolution that is non-physical, that the physical process of Darwinian evolution happens, but it doesn't happen as randomly as, it would be scientifically explained. And that made a lot of sense.
Right. Yeah. But, and I very much think of it, or at least the way that I try to conceptualize it when I'm like throwing it around in my head as a thought experiment, is really looking at it as like a self-sustaining organism in many ways. There's a name for it. It's like some people, and I think the guys in Pennyroyal were talking about this in terms of like cybernetics and third order cybernetics, and these systems. And I think that's one way, if you want to kind of get into those intellectual thought experiments, that you can approach it, is, to see it through the lens of this kind of self-generating, self-organizing, and self-evolving system. And that, in many ways, the physical world is kind of like a cocoon for the this evolution, to happen. If that makes any sense.
Yes. Yeah.
It does. Yes. And if you join that to retrocausality, this thing that is going to be the future had to have this past happen so it could arrive.
Right.
And
yeah. It's an autopoiesis system, or I think that's what it's called. There's a name for it, this kind of system which, like, it exists within it. It is self-generating. There's a name for it. Yeah. And I think it's part of third order cybernetics, this thing. Again, I am not smart enough to really understand these things, but other smarter people can figure it out.
All right. So this one, I don't know if I read this one or not. It's a follow-up to an older story, so I'm going to read the original story. But it's in my keep notes as one I haven't read. I haven't archived it, but I feel like we talked about it. So if I have, sorry if you're hearing it for the second time, but it's still interesting. So the original. Every summer, my partner and I would spend a couple months at a campground in Thompson, Ohio, for seasonal work at the medieval festival near Geneva. Now, I know I read the original because what I have is a response to this one, but it's short. So the entrance to the campground is across from a road from a service entrance to Thompson Ledges, and we walked our dogs there once or twice a day. The road made a loop around the wooded area at the bottom of some small cliffs. We had been there for 4 or 5 summers when Val says to me, "Hey, look at that road." There was a road that went off 90 degrees and then turned again to follow parallel to our usual road and then disappeared further into the woods. We took that road and it climbed gradually until we were at the park, or we were in the park at the top of the cliffs. We walked down the highway and into our campground. It wasn't a very long walk and we were stone cold sober. The next day, we tried finding the same road with no success. We tried every day for a couple of weeks to answer the question, where did the road go? We saw a road running parallel to our usual road, but it was overgrown when what we had been calling the Vortex Road was a fresh white gravel. Furthermore, where the road should have forked, it was only a rain ditch. We decided that the overgrown road was our Vortex Road, and we had just stepped out of time to when it was first laid down. After the Mandela effect rolled in for the next few years, we theorized that Vortex Road was where we stepped out of one world into another. Maybe our world was destroyed and we weren't done working out our karma. Maybe the collective consciousness re-manifested the world. Maybe something just wants us to suffer longer, because if this is the afterlife, somebody really dropped the ball.
Yeah.
So that one I read, I know I read, and that was a couple of years ago. And then, okay, so it was 1921. I almost said 1921, 2021. Yeah. Now, I read it in 1921 originally, but so the response someone had is, I just heard the latest listener story, episode 6, 1921, and had a very similar experience to the first story, Disappearing Road in Geneva, Ohio. A few friends and I drove to the Ren Faire at Geneva, Ohio. That night, we went to the pier after the Ren Faire closed. We actually talked about spooky stuff that had happened to us while at the pier, coincidentally. On the way back to our motel, we drove down a road, and there was a slight bend, a blue house with a small light on it, and a pile of debris in the middle of the road. The debris was kind of shaped like a person. Our driver slowly drove around it, and we debated stopping or not to check it out or make sure it wasn't a hurt person. A few minutes later, we came to an intersection in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by farms. We decided to turn around and check on it. We drove back. No curve in the road, no house, and no thing in the road. We drove all the way back to the last intersection and didn't find a thing. Never knew what to make of it. It would have been 2013, only a year after the other listener has their experience. So, and I think I did. He asked if we could forward it to him, and I think I did. So yeah, I don't know if I read that one or not, but it's definitely interesting.
That's interesting. I mean, I'm looking at the map here for where Thompson, Ohio is, and I see where the Ren Faire or the medieval fair is. That I mean that in no derogatory way. I've been to many Ren Fairs. That's simply. And let's see.
Well, they use both of them. One guy said medieval fair, the other guy said Ren Faire. I'm assuming it's the same thing.
I think it's the same thing. I was just being sort of silly. The first thing I was looking at is to see if there were any significant mounds that were near here, because it's Ohio, so yeah. Mounds. And no, I don't see any. But this area here, it looks like it's mainly forest and yeah. I mean, it's pretty. It's a pretty rural area. Interesting. Yeah.
Those are some of my favorite stories. You have the road that then you can never find it again.
Yeah.
I love it.
Ed Keel wrote about some of those, and that's apparently something that happens, and I don't know the explanation. Multiverse, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't know what reality is when it comes right down to it. So we're just assuming rules of reality are being broken when they might just be, rare occurrences.
But I think it's interesting too that roads they're like these significant things that they signal some sort of sentience, or at least some sort of, like engagement by some mobile type of creature, because even animals can create a path or a road of some kind. But I think that there's a lot of symbolism that just is inherent with our, culture as a species, and, maybe just here, recent, I don't know. I think that goes back throughout any type of civilization. There's always some sort of road or a path. And so it doesn't surprise me when it pops up in anomalous situations, because I feel like it's just got such weight to it as a symbol. But then again, it also could be something which is actually experiential, in terms of being in a different place. You were mentioning. That's the thing about it that I think is also very cool. And while you see it pop up so much, these ideas of supernatural or paranormal roads, Toad Road. I was just reading, finishing Tim's book on all of these legends, there in the York County area, about all these different roads and paths.
Oh,
and
there's the first book you wrote?
Well, The Seven Gates of Hell.
Yeah,
that
first one.
Yeah. And it's, that kind, it's interesting because this idea of the path and the road too, and particularly if I'm going to relate it to, in Tim's book, these Seven Gates of Hell, which there never really were or anything, but it's this sort of story or this myth or this legend that gets developed. And the idea, and this is something that comes particularly from sort of Vedantic Hinduism, is that the spiritual path to enlightenment, takes place over 7 planes, which are essentially 7 gates you have to pass in order to achieve, quote unquote enlightenment, which also, could be you could think of that in many, many ways. I think it possibly could be for some people, this experiencing of what real truth is, that's one way of thinking it. So I just find it interesting when it pops up again and again, these ideas of roads, gates, passing through them. You could even say it has some sort of like cousin similarity to perichoresis.
Right.
And the idea of passing through, a gate or a doorway rather. Yeah.
I was, one of the things that was weird. One of the things about the name Where the Road Go I liked.
What was that?
I hear a dog.
I'm sorry, my dog's trying to join the show.
Oh, okay, that's totally fine. It sounded to me like
an echo.
Sort of,
sorry about that.
Industrial machine for a minute, but it's just a dog. I get that. I got a dog that's right here.
He needed to be a part of things.
They do. So one of the reasons I like the name Where the Road Go is because it implies that we're trying to find new paths that haven't been mapped out before.
Yeah.
And sure, we're going to have to take some of the known roads to get there occasionally, but
yeah, absolutely.
All right. So
one thing I always kind of wonder with those type of stories is what happens to you if you take the disappearing road and you, like, suppose they stopped at the Blue House.
Right.
Yeah.
Would they have disappeared from our world?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's people who have, reported going to diners and things like that when they go back there, they don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, certainly it's possible they could just disappear if they're there too long, but it might behave perfectly normally while they're there and won't disappear until they leave.
Yeah.
My question would be, would another person see the same road?
There's this, and I don't know if for some people it might not have enough of I guess a good narrative underpinning to watch all the way through, but the 2 seasons of the now canceled sort of Stephen King metaverse show Castle Rock, I think it was on Hulu. That was the streamer that was funding it. It's really interesting because it dealt with this idea of, and it's a very much a Stephen King idea, of people going back and forth through these, what he particularly calls thinnies, from one sort of world to the other. It's very much this, but these, what you're talking about makes me think of that. I think his model of the way he's put it forth in fiction, it has a really interesting resonance too, because there's this idea of like, doppelgangers too that are on the other side, or people that move from one place to another, having sort of special abilities or not really being able to interact with the physicality of that world in the same way.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting way, I for me at least, to sort of fictionalize and think about the phenomena of these sort of Rip Brant Van Winkle type phenomena, for lack of a better term.
Well, there's Shirley Black's story about when she walked into the hotel she was staying at.
Oh, right.
And she was supposed to meet one of the researchers that she was working with. And she walked all the way up to her room, never saw anybody, or especially didn't see him. And he was waiting in the lobby the whole time and didn't see her.
Yeah.
I do remember that. Yes, that was a strange one.
Yeah, and I had something similar happen with Natalie, where she was waiting just outside Wegmans by the bench, by the door, for me to get done with the store. And I walked. She messaged me. She said, "I'm on the bench by the door." And I get there, and she's not there.
Yeah.
And I look around. I'm like, "Is there another bench?" There's not another bench.
Right.
All right. So I figured maybe she went to the car, and I go to the car, and she's not there. And I message her. I'm like, "Where are you?" And she's like, "I'm on the bench by the door." And then she came out, to where I was. And the next time we went in, I said, "Was that the bench you were sitting on?" She's like, "Yeah, I never moved from that bench," but she was not there when I walked through.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
things happen.
Yeah, I don't have explanations for these things. All right. So this one's interesting. Just got this one yesterday, maybe. Intense meditation experience. My wife and I have a weekly ritual where we do a spell work and meditation. This has been going on. I felt myself drawn to the god Pan, which makes sense being pagan and having a very nature-based spirituality. So in my rituals, I started calling out to Pan and talking to him without seeing any major results, but the weekly rituals were helping me in other ways, so I kept it up. On this particular night, I had been fixating on the song I.O. Pan by Incubus Succubus, who are a goth rock band, all day, and brought it into my ritual, playing the song as I got myself ready, and in the course of preparing my ritual, I repeated the phrase I.O. Pan over and over, while requesting help in certain areas, particularly related to music and creativity. I have also been playing with the psychoactive aspects of THC in my medication, so I was fairly high, and I was using an app that would let me play with colors and shapes in a way that was very relaxing, and I was hoping to trigger a more psychedelic experience. Everything was going well. I had pretty much decided I would just meditate and not do a tarot reading, as I had been in the habit of doing. I noticed one of the candles I had lit had made a popping noise, and there was something stuck in the wick. I couldn't tell what. This was enough to get me to move closer to my altar and get a better look, and the whole feeling in the room changed. The air became thick and cool, and I felt strongly the thought of somebody trying to tell me something. Yes, it is what it says. So I picked up my tarot deck and did a reading. I have done many over the years, and this one was particularly pointed. I won't go into the deep specifics of it, as it is a whole other conversation, but suffice to say, I have never felt like a reading has hit me so deeply as this one. There was no ambiguity to the message, and it was an epiphany, giving me such a needed perspective and wisdom. I also tend to journal about my readings, and this time, when I went to write it, I had a strange experience. It was very much like what I imagined automatic writing would feel like. My hands and arms were tingling and trembling, and I've never not felt before, and words seemed to flow onto the page faster without me thinking about what I was saying. It was just paragraphs that, rather than being constructed like my regular thoughts, felt like someone talking to me. I even became aware during this process that I felt like my thoughts were in two distinct voices. I was even conversing out loud with my internal dialogue as I felt a presence by this point in front of my altar. The presence brought my mind to a dream I had over a decade ago, which I had nearly forgotten, but it now came flooding back in vivid detail as this voice told me the interpretation of that dream, an interpretation that I would not have figured out at the time. It just seemed like an oddly intense dream. Upon finishing reading what I had written, I was struck by a few things. One was the tingling feeling spreading through more of my body, which made me feel comforted and safe, like something was in contact with me that meant me no harm. I also noted that the writing concluded with an agreement to help me in other pursuits. After this, I felt like all the thickness in the air was pulled back like a whoosh, and the air turned back to how it had felt before. I intuitively knew the ritual was over and sat wondering what I had just experienced. I am no stranger to meditation, but I have never felt anything like what I experienced this time.
Wow.
So I've had pieces of those things happen.
Yeah.
When I had my massive Kundalini awakening, that's pretty much what happened, but I didn't feel like I was getting, it more felt like I just suddenly understood things that I didn't understand before, including some old dreams recurring dreams I hadn't understood. I think he, from the sounds of it, probably just hit a point of spiritual enlightenment. Whatever triggered it. And in this case, maybe showing itself as Pan. And I never know what to make of that. I never know what to make of any entities, even the ones I've dealt with that seem to be like known entities. Like, I don't know if that's something we've created through the history of man, if these things somehow exist but have different faces, or if they're just whatever face we put on them.
Maybe something felt that it could approach, because he'd been calling out Pan.
Yeah.
If something wants to approach him, it can approach safely as Pan, and he will accept that.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is different than the actual pagan deity, appearing, in some objective way. But,
yeah.
Wow, that's quite an experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard when you're talking about the idea of deities, if you feel like that's who appeared to you, who am I to say that it's not? And I think also at the same time, it's important to understand that I do think there is some veracity to the fact that there are, spirits or entities that do have some reason why they want to sort of glom on to humans that are, reaching out to them from the physical plane. And it can be I guess a negative experience for some people. And I think that some of those entities do sort of pretend to be things, or at least there have been instances from people that I believe that have experienced that. So again, I think it comes down to when you said, Soraya, that this, it was a spiritual experience, the revelation, what you're getting from it. I've been told that that's, a good way that you can sort of trust it, is that it's almost like trust your gut. You're never going to have, from a true sort of, God entity or benevolent entity or whatever you want to call it, you're never going to sort of have a feeling of fear or uncomfortability. That there will be, there might be trepidation or something like that, but you're not going to get that the fear that I think some people have experienced when they've come across a non-corporeal type entity, and they can tell the difference. Again, I could be wrong, but this is, it's something I think to think about. I at least would think about it if I were to experience something specific like that. But it sounds like the person got out of it is incredibly beneficial. And so to me, that sounds like it is either the actual God, or it's Pan, or it's your higher self, or, whatever it is, it's beneficial.
Right. Oh, absolutely. And I've had, but even some of the creepy, weird, negative experiences can lead to good things. Sometimes it's about conquering fear. Yeah. And I feel like numerous times that's what I was being shown, is this is how you deal with fear. Especially in certain areas like the Civil War graveyard in the Ithaca graveyard that I took you to, Chris. There are times where that has that field of fear to it. You walk into, and it just feels oppressive, like something specifically does not want you there. And, some people might say, okay, well, then just don't go there. That's a rational explanation. But to me, I feel like this is sort of a gift to help you deal with fear. So to me, it's okay, I need to walk through this, I need to put that fear to the side and just walk through it. And I found that when you do that, that sense of fear tends to alleviate when you're done. It just kind of dissipates. Yeah. So it's almost okay, this is something you can use to help you, but you have to deal with that fear to do it.
Face your fear.
Yeah.
Would you say there was something deliberately trying to scare you to make you push past it?
It feels like that. It feels like there is something there that is just emanating this hostile vibe that's get the hell out. And other days, it feels fine.
It really doesn't want you to. It really wants you to push your way through.
Maybe. Whether it does or not, I am. and I've had other people. And I've had other people with me who I've done that with. We get there and it's okay, here's that field of fear, and it's okay, you need to walk through that. I've done it. You need to walk. And they always feel empowered when they get to the other side because they were able to overcome that fear. And
that's a good point.
And you're doing it and you're feeling like, okay, I know there's nothing here. You're not seeing anything, but the feeling is so strong. And I'm assuming this is very similar to what John Keel felt at the TNT area when he talks about that. There was a point where he couldn't go beyond because the sense of fear was too strong.
Yeah. I mean, it also sounds like a lot of initiation, or at least legends or tropes of initiation rituals or mystery religions and stuff like that. This idea of facing the fear and coming out the other side.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, hey, it's the whole ending of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
I guess I don't remember that one very well.
Yeah, there were these tests he had to take.
It made me think of a scene in Fight Club. Where Meatloaf shows up and wants to join, and Edward Norton tells him, "No, you're not qualified. Get out of here." And so he turns around and leaves, and he chases after him like, "No, we don't really mean it. We mean to reject you, but you've got to come back."
Right?
Yeah.
You got to really want it. And the automatic writing, I've had experiences with that too, where I've written stuff that I didn't really know where it was coming from. It didn't necessarily feel like something was moving my hand, but I was just writing without consciously knowing what I was writing. And there have been once or twice where I used words I didn't know, and I'd get done and be like, okay, I need a dictionary because this is pre-internet. And I'm like, what does that word mean, Which to me says something. It says that like if it was coming from my brain, I should know what the damn word means. So that experience really resonated with me that this guy had. And I definitely think you should follow that up with, continuing down the path it's showing you.
I think so too. Yeah.
It'd be great to hear back from him in months or a year and see where it went.
Yeah. Definitely keep us updated. That would be interesting. And the pan thing makes me think of the Hecate thing I talked about on the show, where I realized, all these things that I'm experiencing are symbols of Hecate.
Yeah.
But I didn't really know anything about Hecate. I heard of Hecate. There's bands like Hecate Enthroned and stuff like this, and I knew she was considered a dark goddess, but that was pretty much the entirety of my knowledge of Hecate, and then all this stuff keeps popping up. And as I'm working on the autobiography, I'm finding more stuff all the way back in, the 90s and stuff that was also very distinctly Hecate. And it's like, whatever this is seems to have been in the background of my life for a very long time.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I believe it's literally the goddess Hecate, but it's something that's using that symbolism.
Yeah. I feel like it's like mantles almost or something. I heard some sort of, and read some stuff, some point that was talking about that these, some of these, I guess, names and sort of popular forms of gods that you see in these different pantheons, that there is some sort of root that comes from the fact that there are essentially, in a similar way that you would find in ceremonial magic, I guess, with, the angels is something I was talking to Ren about, that there's this, that they're like mantles or stations or offices, and that it isn't necessarily the same consciousness that is embodying it. And there were a couple of, sort of legends that I had heard of people, like you could do certain penances. And this is, through Hindu Vedantic sort of lore, penances being things like, stay in a circle for 40 days and 40 nights without, food or drink. And if you're able to do that and sort of withstand what will be, these spirits that start to come to, try to assault you. I mean, I don't know how a human body could stay through this. This is assuming the person's a yogi, that you will rise to the station of Indra, the king of the gods, and that it's this thing that where you will sort of have that mantle. So I think it's it's interesting. It's very reasonable to think that way. For me, at least, this sort of fluidity of who's going, who actually is that, is, or is it a mask or a proxy for something else? But at the end of the day, if, it really has to do with kind of like the feeling, what you're getting from it. And in many ways, these different mantles or sort of masks or proxies have, they have like particular symbolic resonance when it comes, especially, I think, to things that are like inspiration. Like this person was talking about it being inspirational in terms of the arts or being creative. And I think there's a really big linkage there that, people are not as much aware of as, say, they used to be in maybe, I don't know, the time of the Romantics.
Right. That makes sense. I don't know.
You could say that all artwork has a mystical component.
Oh, yeah. I would totally
can't agree. Do it without, other than maybe like some advertising work or something. Any creative endeavor, it has a mystical aspect.
Yeah. And advertising work is really it's chaos magic in many ways.
It's fascinating. Yeah. Yes. All the things. I guess I was trying to think of what would be something that wouldn't have it, but no, right. It's loaded that. But
yeah.
And if you do any kind of art, you feel that flow, that it feels like you're connected to something. Yeah. That it's not just you putting stuff on a page or painting or whatever it is you're doing, but that you're somehow connected to something, not maybe an entity, but like an energy,
Yeah. Sure. Or even just being connected, like feeling that connection to something, to the world around you. Yeah. There was one time that I did ask very specifically. There was a figure that I knew, this guy in India who I had met, who sort of had a profound effect on me. And, he's passed since then, but he was somebody that I believe, there's a possibility that if I speak to him in this, from this place, that he might hear, be able to receive that message. And there was one time that I was specifically asking for, some help in trying to, I guess, get something creative out, but it was in the service of, I guess, the greater mystery of life. And I had specifically been asking him for help as part of, a meditation that I was doing. And it really, I didn't feel like I was, somebody else was speaking through me, but all of a sudden there was like a blockage that was gone. And there was this clarity of thought. So I was able to write and, sort of bring sort of my thoughts together about this particular thing in a very, very clear and very fluid way that just was, it was like an outpouring, but it felt like it was coming from me. And I totally recognize, that type of thing happening to people.
All right. Well, let's take a quick break and we'll come back and get to a couple more stories. Quick mid-show break here. Anything you need Where Did the Road Go related can be found at wheredidtheroadgo.com. You can become a patron, help support the show, get extra content as well as the show a week early, and special things throughout the month as well. And it's only $3, so it's, I think, pretty worth it. If you have a story you'd like to share with us, you can do so at stories@wheredidtheroadgo.com. General contact for the show is contact@wheredidtheroadgo.com. And of course, there's a Facebook page, a Facebook group, Twitter, Discord, YouTube, everything. It's all out there, and all can be found on the website. You can also check out my underground metal show, The Last Exit for the Lost, where not only do we play stuff you're probably not going to hear anywhere else, but we have lots of discussions about movies and things like that throughout the show. So if you're into metal and heavier music and you're looking for something new, www.thelastexit.org. Okay, recommendation for this week. I'm going to go with a book series. Usually I do podcasts, but I wanted to mention this one a while ago. I feel like it's somewhat well known, but in case people aren't aware of it, Dan Simmons wrote a series called Hyperion. And so it was Hyperion, The Fall of Hyperion, Endymion, and The Rise of Endymion. I mean, they're still some of my favorite books. The first one, Hyperion, I think started as a bunch of short stories that he then worked into a narrative. The only problem I have with it is that each story is a chapter, which means the chapters are very, very long, and I'm the type of person that likes to stop at the end of a chapter. When that chapter is, 130 pages, you're going, I don't know if I can read this tonight. But it's a great book. And then The Fall of Hyperion takes it in much more of a story format where it's not all these separate things that tie in at the end, but it's actually moving forward as a full story. The same with the last two books. They're absolutely brilliant and, just fantastic reads. Dan Simmons in general writes some really fantastic stuff. And I think until I discovered Michael Marshall Smith, I would have considered him my favorite author. So now he's my second favorite author. But yeah, if you haven't read Hyperion and its sequels, it's definitely something worth seeking out if you like really strange sci-fi, really good storytelling, and just it's just a weird story, and it works beautifully, and it's very moving by the end. So there's my recommendation. Dan Simmons' Hyperion series. All right, back to the show. You are listening to Where Did the Road Go? And I'm here with Christopher Ernst and Vincent Treewell. And we've been dealing mostly with listener stories, some comments and replies from other shows as well. But I have, let's see if we can get through the remaining stuff here. This one is just labeled sleep stuff. I don't know if they labeled that or if I labeled that. Says, I have a few stories to share if you think these might be interesting enough for broadcast. Despite growing up in a very Catholic house in Glasgow, Scotland, I've been interested in the occult and things other since my very early teens. These are some of the things I can't easily explain away. They didn't happen at a turbulent time in my life. There was no repetition. They're into the weird stuff I've experienced category. I like that they looked to see if it was a turbulent time in their life. So, I mean, that's an important thing.
Yeah, it totally is. Yeah.
It's interesting that it wasn't.
Yeah. Shadow person. I've been interested in dream states since I was young and had a few lucid dreams as well as some hefty nightmares that I've had to drag myself out of, and a couple of instances of waking up to sleep paralysis. None of these shook me like this incident. What happened does seem to blur some of the boundaries of different states of dreaming and consciousness realms. It is also important to acknowledge that human memory is imperfect, particularly when it comes to recovered memory or things recalled after a long period of inactivity. This is one of those instances that has never been out of mind. This took place about 30 years ago, but it's one of those things that feels vivid in recall even now. I was still living at home in my late teens, and my family had gone on holiday, so I had the house to myself. It was odd when I found myself with the sensation of being awake, but lying in the living room on the floor below. The state was very different to normal dreaming, even lucid ones. It was more resonant with being awake. The room was dark, but I became aware of the outline of a figure lit by the streetlights coming in through the blinds on the windows. It had short to no hair, not heavily built, but not spindly of limb either. In fact, it was very average. There was a sense of it being male, but not possible to tell. I realized that the way I was lying seemed odd, and it felt like my shoulders were propped up on their knees. And it felt like my shoulders, that's what it says, okay, with them kneeling on the floor, but there was an odd moment. I'm not totally sure what he's describing there. A very pregnant pause, and then something in the mood changed, a very palpable sense of malevolence or at best mischief. I felt it trying to pull my mouth open. Felt like one hand over the top of my head holding me down. With the other, they managed to get their thumb in my mouth and pull down my lower jaw. Did we read this one already? Because this is really familiar to me.
It doesn't sound familiar to me.
Okay.
Me neither. It sounds horrible, but it's new.
Yeah, that's really scary. I don't like the opening the jaw part.
Yeah. Because the problem is I pre-read all of these, obviously.
Oh, right. Yeah. So, and so that familiar.
Yeah. And I think that really stood out to me there. Okay, so I could feel their thumbprint on my tongue, rough and very raised. With my own thumb for comparison, I reckon there would have been about half to 2/3 less detail, but what there was raised more than a normal thumbprint and calloused hard. They started to pull down hard and were getting my mouth open despite me trying to fight back, and I got to the point where I realized that I had to get myself out of it, so I did that thing telling myself to wake up, which worked. So far, so what? At this point, we're dealing with a fairly straightforward nightmare scenario. I woke up short of breath with the definite clarity of being conscious, but the thing that struck with me is the absolute ache in my front 4 teeth of my lower jaw. I was together enough to check my fingers and thumbs for teeth marks in case this was a result of me lying weirdly and ending up with my own thumb in my mouth and getting it out of proportion in the dream state. No teeth marks or signs of anything on my fingers. The next day, I attempted to replicate the pressure required to get the same feeling in my teeth I felt after the encounter. I started with my tongue to see if I could have potentially put enough pressure on my teeth to push them, and then tried with my thumb, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't get close to the level of discomfort I had in my teeth, and the pain in my thumb was sharper. The attempts at really deep indentations on my thumb that lasted quite a while. Even after the marks had gone, the sensation lingered a much longer time, so if it had been self-inflicted, I would have woken up with a definite reminder in the form of pain and or marks. This has stuck with me for all this time. Normal sleep paralysis doesn't quite fit the bill either, particularly with a relation to the jaw struggle. I've read and heard a fair bit about shadow people, and it does and doesn't fit with a lot of the descriptions. Things like hats and red eyes, the shadows in particular, and the physical sensations don't fit with a lot of the descriptions where the main vibe is of being watched with such malicious intent. Considering all possible options, I needed to consider this as a screen memory for alien abduction. It doesn't feel like that's even in the right ballpark. To this day, I'm none the wiser. There's a definite dream world vibe, but it seems to have bled into the waking world. This has never recurred, and there are no other weird events at the house. However, things continued to occur throughout my life. And we'll get to some more of that. Here's a couple more. Well, let's address this one, because this is a strange story.
Yeah, I mean, it's a terrifying dream, or experience.
And as bad as it gets, yes.
No, go ahead, Vincent.
No, just that I would wonder if it wasn't a screen memory for something. Because it just seems so weird.
Well,
and he's kind of in a fetal position. I don't know what that is.
So the opening of the mouth, I'm trying to remember why that's familiar.
I can't, I mean, I'm thinking of like, it's a trope of like horror film.
Oh, I see.
Type
yeah.
thing. Yeah. But I can't think of any like particular paranormal case where that would be it.
Did you have something, Soraya, with a dream of a clown trying to do something to you?
Oh, that was the last sleep paralysis experience I ever had, where I was trying to get to sleep and I was annoyed because it kept, as soon as I laid down, it would appear on the bed behind me and I kept snapping out of it. And I finally just grabbed it, threw it on the floor, and was starting to drag it into the other room while I was in the sleep state still. And I turned around to look at it, and it just looked like this weird clown that was like really flexible, like almost like a doll. And then
the ragdoll clown.
Yeah, and it was just kind of had this huge smile on its face, like it was laughing at me. And I went, "Oh, I could think of things to do to you." And then its smile turned to like horror, and I woke up. And I have not had another sleep paralysis experience since.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
That's what it reminded me of. Yeah.
Okay, opening of the mouth ceremony. It is Egyptian. I thought it was Egyptian.
There you go.
Ancient Egyptian ritual described in the funerary texts, such as the pyramid texts. There's ample evidence of this ceremony, which was believed to give the deceased their fundamental senses to carry out tasks in the afterlife. Various practices were conducted on the corpse, including the use of specific instruments to touch body parts like the mouth and the eyes. These customs were often linked with childbirth, which denoted rebirth and new beginnings. For instance, cutting bloody meat from animals as offerings to the deceased signified the birthing process, which typically involves blood and represented the commencement of a new life. So yeah, that's where the phrase "the opening of the mouth" is coming.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Oh. So
maybe again, dealing in these symbols, I'd be curious if that person has any fundamental knowledge of Egyptian mythology, or if there's anything. Yeah,
and I feel like there's something almost clicking in my brain, almost like maybe something was trying, the same way the opening of the mouth is supposed to give you senses in the afterlife. Maybe this thing was trying to wake him up to something here. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking, either that or I forget. The feeling sounds like it was somewhat malevolent or negative. I don't know.
But again, like we said, when you're waking up to things that you have to deal with,
strange, right?
Yeah, or you have to deal with it can be scary. It can feel negative even when it's not.
That's true.
And there's so much weird stuff in Scotland. So I wish to do a little bit more of the folklore there. And is there something that's known for doing this, or?
That's a great point. Is what significance that has. Certainly from like a Catholic standpoint, it reminds me to some degree of the motion that would happen when the priest gives communion, communion wafer.
And he did say he was raised Catholic.
Yeah.
Growing up in a very Catholic house.
Yeah.
So, maybe this thing's giving him communion to the other world.
Right.
I would find that interesting if it was me. I would start going down a rabbit hole of the opening of the mouth symbolism.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So the next story he has here involves ball lightning. During a lightning storm, my girlfriend at the time and I were watching through a window trying to catch bolts of lightning as the storm moved overhead. As the storm passed, we could see the dark night sky behind the thundercloud and then noticed something right on the edge of the cloud, a ball of light moving slowly along the edge, bobbing slightly but moving upwards. We watched this for several minutes until the cloud moved out of sight. The ball didn't change direction or do anything dramatic and seemed entirely normal, just a ball of light bobbing along the edge of a thundercloud. I've seen something like that. There was a storm right next to my house, and, big thunderhead. And out of the thunderhead was this ball of light that just kept coming out and going back in.
Ball lightning, for so long, was dismissed by science as just not real, just made up folklore, what have you. And then they were able to create it in the lab, and so now it's real.
Yeah.
It was always real. It predates everything, but it's the stories people have of it coming into their house and doing things and are just bizarre, some of them.
Well, that's when you go into the idea of plasma intelligence,
Yes.
So,
and lightning is so much, is it a plasma state? I'm not sure, but it's extremely hot and powerful, to where it could create something like that.
Oh, absolutely. It's stuck in my mind when I had the experience. Obviously it's stuck in his as well, because it's not something you normally see. Definitely a rare phenomena. Okay, so the last one, I think it's the last one here, says stone tape / ghost. In a rented flat, I woke up one morning and saw a woman facing the wall in the bedroom. She was wearing a long dark coat and was brushing her hair as if she was about to go out. Then she dissolved from the floor up quite rapidly. It could be argued that I was still dreaming or having a false awakening, which is fine, but getting out of bed just after the event, there isn't much doubt in my mind that what I saw happened outside my head. There was no feeling of weirdness, spookiness, or anything you might associate with an apparition, particularly as this was the first thing in the morning, and what I saw was so mundane that the notion that it needs to be strong emotion that imprints on stone doesn't fit well with someone just going through what seemed to be a very normal thing. The first incident was quite dramatic, but the last two seem a curious combination of quite weird stuff and being very mundane. Cheers, Brian. So, that it could have been a stone tape. It doesn't, maybe that woman was having a very emotional time while she was brushing her hair. Maybe she was dealing with something mentally that somehow imprinted on the environment.
Yeah.
Or maybe she just did that every day for decades, and that kind of imprinted in that way. I've heard of some situations like that. Something Art Bell was talking about, quite a while ago, but there was a postman who walked the same route for years and years. And after he died, people still saw him walking that same route. And it wasn't because something dramatic happened. It's just the repetitions.
Yeah. We're a groove in reality.
Yes. Or he could be having a time slip. Yeah. And he wound up in somebody else's bedroom at that flat at a different time.
And he was the ghost to them.
Yes.
All right. So I got one more here I think we could squeeze in. This is from Daryl. He said, when I was a baby, I had a frightening experience that happened to my family members. From what I recall being told, my Aunt Lori put some amulet or a deck of tarot cards into a vase. I think she was trying to hide it or something, but it was left in there. Out of the blue, the vase exploded for no apparent reason, and a family member looked and noticed blood on my face. I was not crying, but they were still in shock. Something, a cloth, I guess, was used to wipe the blood away, and they did not find a cut. I was perfectly fine. The whole experience freaked them out. I don't know what was said to my aunt about it, but I'm guessing she learned her lesson. Now, later he mentions that at the age of 12, he was a part of the Jehovah's Witnesses. So I don't know if that was the case then, but that might be why, they were hiding the amulet or the...
Yeah, that would have been a no-no, I'm sure.
He says, many years later on Coast to Coast, someone called in and explained she went through the same experience. I wish I knew who she was. All I knew is she was a woman of around middle-aged from the sound of her. It was between 25 and 30 when I heard her. I was between 25 and 30 when I heard her tell her experience and was amazed at what happened to me was not completely an uncommon experience. I looked all over Google once looking for the experience, but the keywords exploding vase, exploding vase produced nothing. Neither did blood on face, but no cut, bloody face, no cut. All I could assume is that someone in the spirit was trying to get the attention of my family to warn them they were in danger. The only danger I can think of is the danger of neglect, as my mother was borderline totally neglectful of me and my 3 siblings. I wonder if it relates to my astrology chart. And he says 11/11/71 Port Alberni, BC, Vancouver Island is where it happened.
Oh, okay. Okay. Is that a date? Is that their?
I assume that's their birth date. I don't know.
I think that's their birth chart date. Yeah, they're giving the name and the time they were born, the place, maybe.
Yeah. Well, it says where is where it happened. So maybe that was.
It's where it happened. Okay.
Yeah. I know zero about astrology, so I can't really say.
I don't know much, except I know you have to have the time and the place as well as the date. Yeah.
Says at age 12. In Jehovah's Witness, I was a Jehovah's Witness. I was given my first preaching responsibility. Give a 5-minute Bible speech to the congregation. I was really, really nervous and prayed every day for Jehovah to help me do well. When the evening finally arrived a month later, I went up on stage and suddenly felt the, quote, Holy Spirit. I was not nervous. I was confident. I felt the energy flowing through my entire body. I was very strong and unmistakable. I was confident and did perfectly the whole time. I just made one mistake, which was a slight mispronunciation of the main character's name. And I mean, that's energy, one way or the other, however you want to term it.
Yeah.
And it looks like he's explored a few different things here. He says, another story is when I joined the Falun Gong in Bangkok.
Falun Gong, yeah.
Okay, I figured you might be familiar with that.
Yeah.
He says, I suffered from high arches on my feet all my life. I couldn't stand in one place any longer than 30 seconds as it was too painful. I decided to tough it out during the standing exercises at the Falun Gong meetup at the park. It was really painful, but after about a week, I was suddenly healed overnight. I went to the park after work and not one bit of pain. It was just completely cured. After enough exercise and psychological development, I experienced what is called gong hands. I was an English teacher, and I noticed I was able to squish chalk on my fingers like it was marshmallow. I did it in front of the class 2 times in a row, and they were amazed. I knew it was the emerging of the typical Falun Gong paranormal ability called the gong hands. I stopped with Falun Gong, believing it to be more brainwashing, but it's noteworthy to believe that there have been millions of reported miraculous healing miracles by others in the group. The paranormal powers in Falun Gong range from levitation, teleportation, perfect mind reading, X-ray eyes, etc. The master is like one of those Indian enlightened masters. He answers any question articulately in great detail and seems to have infinite knowledge and great intelligence, but like all religions, the beliefs don't quite add up after enough honest self-reflection.
Yeah, I mean, Falun Gong's really interesting because he's right. I mean, you're essentially dealing with, from my understanding of it, is you're essentially, the practice itself is essentially a ki or chi, based practice. And it's similar to, a lot of yogic practices that would, possibly elicit what are called siddhis, these powers or psychic powers have done. I mean, the guy who runs it also, I know beyond what this person is saying, is, even if he has those powers, is, kind of a crazy cult leader and probably not doing cool stuff. I mean, Falun Gong's been doing some really weird, like they're super QAnon, anti-vax, and weirdly pro-Trump. Even, they're Chinese, and they're the ones that run the Epoch Times newspaper.
Okay.
Which is this really weird conspirituality newspaper. Yeah. Anyway, that's really interesting that they had that. I mean, that's some the particular sort of like chi energy effects that the gong hands. It's really interesting that they experienced that. Yeah.
Yeah. And he says this I was not familiar with in the way he's talking about it. So this involves orgone energy, which was Wilhelm Reich's concept, which I think there is something very much to orgone energy. He says, the next thing I would like to go into is what I'm currently involved in. It is an immensely powerful manifestation device. I know you are more into stories than miraculous experiences, but I'll be succinct. After making 5 of these orgonite manifestation spirits called Bubble Tech, pain that had been building up in my back after about 7 months slowly increasing, I had asked 5 of my devices to help me with the pain in my back. Because I couldn't take much more of it. The next morning, I was 90% pain-free. After about 6 weeks, it was about 100%. Miracles are common in Bubble Tech. We also win battles with HARP when we collectively work our willpower through the manifestation devices. Many health and miscellaneous type miracles have been and continue to be reported. This special type of organite must be charged at 330,000 hertz for 9 days to become a powerhouse manifestator. So I was, I did not know anything about this, so I Googled it. And
they're talking about HARP, like HARP, like high altitude.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there is an academia paper, which is written mostly in capitals, which immediately makes me very suspicious. And it says, Bubble Tech is the world's largest and most important project because it proves that humans are the godhead of creation. Via using our intentions, i.e. images and emotions installed at the seed level of creation via Bubble Tech, which is Wilhelm Reich's orgonic technology on steroids, a group of us humans have been able to do the following verifiable miracles. Saved at least 1 billion animals and lots of humans by making it rain in Australia, the Amazon, Congo, and Siberia, putting out all of the fires, starting in December 2019. And then it has a link to the rain putting out fires. But the problem with this stuff is you can claim anything you want.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. Yeah. As long as, you're not asking for money for this tech.
Right.
That supposedly can save anybody's life. Awesome.
Exactly. There's no reason not to experiment with it.
Yeah.
To punctuate the fact that Bubble Tech did all of these miracles, we found a human to save, this Australian girl, 11-year-old Samara, who had been on chemo for leukemia. She had not walked in 3 weeks. The following day, she got up and walked. She lost 2 kilos of water retention overnight and went home a couple of days later with 0 detectable cancer. We requested such a healing to solidly prove that we'd made the miraculous rain in Australia and put out the fires. So the problem.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
All of this sounds great. I think that particularly when you're talking about healing people, it's really nice to see actual, and not really just not testimonials, but it's good to see some sort of proof. I think it's tough because there are a lot of things that are happening out there, I think, that are appealing to people's need for both spiritual place, but also to heal many physical and psychological ills. And if there really are things that can be offered, that's great. But I think there's a lot of stuff which ends up being kind of snake oily, you know? Yeah. And I don't know anything about this Bubble Tech, but oftentimes if it sounds too good to be true, it is. And I'm casting no dispersions against this person. If it really does work, that's great. And I hope that go forward with it. And, I hope it's, but this seems to me familiar in some ways, the kind of stuff this person's talking about.
And like I said, I fully think that Wilhelm Reich was onto something with orgone energy.
Yeah.
Yes. But like I said, what bugs me about this academia paper is that it's written in mostly capitals.
Right.
Which is not how you write a paper. And it's like, oh, we did this and we did this and we did this. And maybe they did. But there's no there's no evidence trail to support that.
Yeah.
I mean, you can kind of say whatever you want, and I don't know. Yeah. I guess that's it. You can say whatever you want.
Before he gets into the miraculous energy and stuff, I just want to go back to the exploding vase.
Oh, okay.
Because that's something that I actually had witnessed a similar experience. This is a couple decades ago. But we're just, in our household, there was some tension. Nothing traumatic, but just the kind of family tension that exists, in many families.
Right.
And there was a light fixture in the ceiling of a room where nobody was in or nearby exploded and just exploded, shattered into pieces. And when he describes being 12 years old and being neglected and what seems like a stressful, tense family situation, that might have caused the poltergeist-type activity with the vase.
Could be.
Yeah.
He was younger than that when that happened. He doesn't actually remember that.
Okay.
Yeah, he was told about it by his aunt.
Okay. But it wouldn't take, really weird circumstances for something like that to happen.
Right. Well, I think that the weird part is that he had blood on his face after the vase exploded. And there was no cuts or anything, no obvious place where the blood came from.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds more to me like, stigmata type phenomena.
Yeah, true.
The blood. Yeah.
I mean, this guy's clearly had some weird stuff in his life and is,
absolutely.
and is open to some of this stuff, which is probably why it works for him.
Yep. Good point. Very good point.
So, all right, we are just about out of time. Chris, where can people find you?
You can go to brightrectangle.com and you can find films that I've worked on through that, or a couple of them are still on Amazon, and you can find The Hill in the Hole that I made with Bill Darman, Adam Gorightly, and that's on Troma too.
Awesome.
As well. Yeah.
And Vincent?
Well, I have a website at vincenttreewell.wordpress.com. I'm on Facebook. The podcast, The Weird Part with Vincent Treewell, is available on most podcatchers and my YouTube channel. And the novel Cosmic Collision is available on Amazon.
All right. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you, sir. Chris?
I want to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons, and especially those of you pledging $10 or more. Greg Ross, Illuminati, Chuck Shutters, Leanne Cherry, Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Bart Ooms, 36 Dingo, CJ, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, Christine, a blue second-gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, land of the crazy and communicable, Chris, Craig Cisternos, Greg Parmenter, Diane B., Empty K, Eric Todd, J. Otto Bullitt, James Lattimore, James Lindsay, Jim and Sophie, John Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linz Jackson K., Luke Osborne, MJ Armstrong, Mark Brady, Mr. Weird, Oli Andre Olar, Patricia W., Paul Jeffries, Philosopher of Mirrors, Ray Benedetto, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Russ Rouse, Sam Sharon, Seed Person 1, Stacy Sherwood, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Varosh K., Vincent Treewell, Walker, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Ren Collier, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, and Craig Sagastumi. Thank you all so very much for helping me keep this show going. All right, I hope you enjoyed that. We did do a Patreon segment where we talk about some very old newspaper stories, kind of the Charles Fort, Magonia type of stuff. So if you're a patron, you'll be getting that. If you want to become a patron, wheredidtheroadgo.com and click on the big Patreon link. And speaking of patrons, I want to welcome some new patrons: Nick Valenzuela, Greg Ross, James Wilson, TDT Skunkworks, and a special thanks to CJ for upping his pledge as he did. All right, I will see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.